To start, we're going to watch a little video together. This is basic introductory knowledge just to set and foreground you in what we're going to talk about. The reason we foregrounded our conversation with this particular video, even though it's very UN centric, is because it was the one video I could find that was holistically covering all the different elements, including reparation and compensation, which are often left behind in safeguarding topics. So I thought that it was a great way to just start our conversation. I
Hi,
think
hi, Myra. Sorry to interrupt. I guess some participants were asking about the audio. So there was no audio. Was it supposed to be without the audio?
it was not, but
Okay.
I'm sorry that I could not see the chat. So, but were you able to see the captions on it?
Yes, I did. Did anybody have any issue with seeing the main principles and the text?
You can also share the link in the chat box
Yes.
so people who were
I,
not able to listen, they can.
I will do that. They were saying the exact thing that was written on the screen. So hopefully I didn't waste a lot of time. But I would give the floor over to Vinza. I think somebody raised their hand, Amna Durani. Amna, if there's anything you would like to say, can you put it in the chat and we'll get to you. We'll get to you immediately while Kanza starts. Please, Kanza, take the word. Oh,
Hello.
thank you, Amna.
Uh,
I'm so sorry.
I would appreciate, I have opened up the chat while I'm also taking the session. I will read in the chat also. If there are any concerns, we'll get back to you. Uh, So power and intersectionality vulnerability is the topic I'll be covering. Before we start, I would also like to foreground all of us has tried as much as possible with the limited time we had to cover up the basics of the topic, and we would appreciate that if you would like us to go in depth in these issues, we will be doing this in that format also moving forward. Uh, we are starting with one group reflective questions because we do want to hear from you also. And I am pasting the question within the chat box also. You can read that there, or you can scan uh, QR code to go onto Mentimeter. And there is this link also where you can add this code to access the Mentimeter, and you'll get the question from there. But if some people are not able to access Mentimeter, the question is going to be pasted in the chat, uh, and you can respond through that. This is a reflective questions. You don't need to immediately go into with the very hard on answers, but something which immediately comes to your mind. You can just share your reflections of the questions. We would love to know and discuss on this. I am going to share the question in the chat as well. When you think of power, what immediately comes to your mind? How do you see power in workspaces? Workspace sexual harassment. It could be anything. Whenever you think of power, what does that word makes you feel? How do you perceive power? And when we look at it in the context of workspace sexual harassment, what is it? We have 5 response. I'm just not able to see those responses on the screen, Myra.
No one has responded yet.
As we have limited time, we would appreciate that we take 5 minutes for this. Power is used, usually misused to take advantage of junior female staff. Power shapes how people behave. Power dynamics are the root cause of PSEA. Power dynamics and imbalances. As for me, when I think of power, I think of balance, some with more power than the other. The way committees are formed. Power is intoxicating. Power is used for or to cover ups. Power shapes culture of a workplace. Power in sexual harassment manifests as a dangerous imbalance of authority. So I see a similar pattern in these questions, that how we see power imbalance in workspaces and how particular identities are targeted. I think of patriarchal systems that reproduce inequalities where we go. I think we can move forward. Hierarchy control, force duties. I think we can move forward on the other slide, Myra. So as you all have pointed out at the imbalance of power, this is just a visual representation of different understanding of power. because I do see everyone has different experience of power. There are people who are still answering that policies on choices of clothes. I think of patriarchal systems that reproduce inequalities wherever we go. So these are some identities through which we get power, and through which our power is also taken away. And and the consequences of this is systematic exclusion, gender, sexuality, religion, social cultural capital. uh, in the same context, these identities might also take power, but also to some dominant gender and sexualities, religion, social cultural people with social cultural category might get more power. And there are identities who are coming from oppressive caste might have power, but people who are coming from marginalized caste might don't have power. And there are race, class, state, immigrant refugee status, migrant workers, disability, indigenous, tribal, native people. Some identities are outrightly those who will be impacted more by this power imbalance. We do have these external structures of power and methods through which power is asserted, which is institutional and cultural power. We'll get more into that. I'll give you some simple examples to understand these basic concepts: socioeconomic status power, psychological power, sexual power and coercion, physical power, and gendered power. These are some types of power that show sexual assault and abuse of power can be committed beyond physical assertion, and can be done through emotional and mental abuse and leave a lifelong impact on the victims or survivors. You can move to the next slide. So, for example, if we are to understand what does institutional cultural power looks like, people who exploit power use false religious, cultural, unfair laws and institutional practices to get away with sexual violence and assert institutional and cultural norms to manipulate the victims or survivors. And for example, and this is coming from a very real lived experience I have encountered in different workspaces, where trans women are not given a position of presiding officer in anti-sexual harassment committee because the law specify a cis women can only hold that position. This is institutional cultural norm, and it can become very difficult for trans queer victims or survivors to access justice in that way. And this also makes and highlight this question that who gets to sit in on these decision making tables. Then there is gendered power. In many instances, sexual violence is linked to gender equality inequality, where men may assert oppressive gender domination, pushing patriarchal society norms. This is particularly evident in cases of sexual violence against women, LGBTQI plus community, and disabled individuals. For example, some white cishet men can end up violating women of color by saying they don't understand South Asian traditional culture. In regressive culture, it is shaming and controlling employees' choice of clothing in workplace. There is physical assertion of power. There is psychological power, using mental torture tactics to assert power over people by dominant gender through manipulation, job termination, death threats, blackmailing, and isolation, which leads victim to face difficulty in reaching out for support, which is with family, friends, and make it more difficult to escape the violence. Character assassination, victim blaming, casual sexist jokes in workspaces, slut shaming, threatening them to harm their close ones, silencing, stonewalling, senior management support, and outright denial are also a way of dismissing the victims or survivors to corner them with gaslighting and behaving like nothing ever happened by not accepting or acknowledging the abuse. And why some of the people who exploit power are more prominent to do these things. So, for example, socioeconomic status decide who gets to gaslight, who gets to silence the victims and survivor, who gets to give termination threats or death threats or isolate. Or who gets to, people who exploit power also use sexual power and coercion. They record people, they use their vulnerable stories shared in the workspaces against the person who is coming from a dysfunctional space. They will use messages, they will use the systematic shame and guilt. And people who are mostly doing this are coming from oppressive dominant class, which shows their socioeconomic status, power, class, caste, gender, race, religion, and sex on the bodies of marginalized identities such as indigenous, black, disabled, scheduled caste, tribe, Muslims, young people from dysfunctional families, economical, weaker sections, women, girls, and gender diverse people. They use money, resources, and social status. They can have titles like teachers, employees, caregivers, social workers, law enforcement, ministers, etc., to make it convenient to exploit vulnerable population. Next slide, Myra. I hope I was able to make you all understand that these are some methods, not the universal framework of how power is asserted, but some common tools which plays a very big role. We will also look at it with a decolonial lens of looking at power in the context of workplace sexual harassment, which is meetings are not just where decisions are made, there are where belonging is negotiated. And we, even if we are in these spaces, there are invisible identities at play, uh, and visible identities. And uh, can you please do the slideshow? Yeah, no worries. Yeah. And while I say this, I also understand what kind of power dynamics happens in these meeting rooms, in these committees who decide who decide what will happen with a certain case. So these are some points which we should analyze within our bodies and within the systems we are in. So analyzing our ideas of power and assumptions of powerlessness. And when I say assumptions of powerlessness, the moment we think that we don't have power in certain spaces due to our identities, that is the moment when we give up our power. And this was a brilliant quote I read somewhere, and I don't remember where I read it, but this was stuck with me, that how we also give up our power when we think that we are powerless in this condition. So these are some points we should always analyze. So how authority actually works, it is not just titles but social, cultural, senior management friendships, their influence in the working space. Are you feeling the constant need to analyze the room when it is safe to speak? uh, are you always on moving on eggshells when, especially in the context of sexual violence or workplace harassment, which might not be visibly physical markers, but also those emotional nuances which is existing. And sometimes we also are not able to call it out or address it because they are so technically politically right. uh, as we work in spaces which talk about sexual liberations, work on sexual reproductive health rights and justice. So how we navigate this? So looking on those nuances, name what you have felt in physical interactions with different people who made you feel uncomfortable and what you might have made others feel. So also while we also analyze how others are uh, reacting, interacting with us, we also analyze and look within, that how we are also interacting with people, how other people are also feeling. So impact over intent philosophy. Swati and I discussed this multiple examples of how this plays in the workspace. Then, how to identify your marginalized identity markers might be impacting how your case will be heard. So, making sure people with marginalized identities are on the decision making seat to make it heard and equitable, whose language, stories, and testimonies are counted as credible, how to testify and disagree without being punished. So, also navigating situations like this, how to read the emotional tone of the room, listen to your body and truth. This is something which I will always like all the feminists to foreground, because even if are we have now been groomed through different theories, different spaces. We know all the terms, but even people like us who have read multiple theories on sexual violence, and we also end up in spaces where we started question ourselves, we end up in confusion. We need to listen to our bodies and our truth, what we experienced, how our body felt, seek support from laws. So if your organization is actually not outrightly following the constitutional laws within your respective countries, you look into it and you try to find loopholes. Also ask for emotional support, safe person, demand transparency and accountability while the case is being uh, recorded, investigated, and foreground co-regulation. Sometimes this also happens before even we go and address our cases. Sometimes this has happened in multiple cases that, I'm with my colleague and then I will tell them, I felt something. Did you also feel it? And sometimes if we don't talk it, we never get that answer also. The kind of validation and co-regulation also plays a very big role when we're offering support and also when someone is sharing that with us. So understanding that what kind of intention we are with and how co-regulation also helps us understand that I'm not the only person who's facing this. I have felt this in multiple workspaces where I felt one person was actually harassing, but I was not able to name it. This person was a wheelchair user. I was an assistant, young assistant there, and they used to, uh, turn my chair and I was not able to understand it. But then other people also started, when I shared this discomfort, those people started sharing that we also have this kind of issues with this person. So that kind of co-regulation also helps. Inspiration of these action points from the piece of Asanda, the hidden cost of excellence, meeting power and the curriculum no one teaches you. This is a brilliant piece from a member of a community which I co-lead with Swati Rinku, which is decolonizing co-writing space. We discuss issues and decolonial ways of thinking. Uh, you can change the slide, Myra. Yeah. So, as we know, consent, would love to know what consent means to all of you within the chat. But because even if we are coming from spaces where we know we have done multiple sessions on consent, how consent looks for us, still believe in always reiterating consent and how we can look at it in different ways. So these are the types of consent, which is written, verbal, oral, non-verbal, through body gestures, moving away, showing physical discomfort, emotional. It is a way of respecting the other individual emotional needs and space provided by expressing emotional needs and mentally resisting someone's power over you by verbalizing your boundaries, having faith and giving space to a person to self-direct their own emotions and needs. Physical permission to get involved in any kind of physical act, verbal or physical actions can directly give it. But we also need to look at consent, even when we have these types of consent, through a feminist value, which is consent and agency, foregrounding that consent is not just a yes or no. It is not as black and white. It's also consists of different types of modes. While valuing what is given in our respective laws and trying truly understand the layers of sexual violence, we foreground relational consent with reiterative and anti-discriminatory. There is a comment which is unfortunately understandable. Many people don't feel comfortable sharing their stories because of fear of judgment and many other reasons. Consent is, I agree. Consent is changeable and reversible. Consent isn't permanent or long term, and it is always evolving in nature. In simple words, consent is revocable. We always come with this idea, oh, I've given this consent, so then this is the universal law. I have just given it. We can take it back. It is reversible. And as feminists, we need to learn about consent and agency to remove our own biases around sexual violence. If our respective laws have given us the age of consent, do we think that every age, gender, race, caste, and person with a disability have their agency and consent? Informed consent is very important, a form of consent where you are given full information about the situation, consent under pressure and power. Sometimes a person say yes under pressure and fear, but the body keeps rejecting the violence. Thus, consent given under the pressure of an authority isn't consent, but forceful compliance. Role of grooming is extremely important in workspaces. There are times where our bosses, where people who exploit power, infantilize us. They also call that we are a family and then also invade our private spaces. They force friendships through name calling. I've had multiple people in power calling me cutie, baby, or different kind of names, and that is a part of grooming, normalizing what can be tolerated. So questioning those kind of spaces, name calling by people who exploit power. You can move on to the other slide, Myra. This is a spectrum of consent by Kai Cheng Thom, inspired by the work of Betty Martin. This was given to me by a feminist friend, Anmol, and we have done multiple trainings with this tool. This is a beautiful tool because as oh, slide. Yes, this is a beautiful tool. Whenever we also, even when we understand that consent uh, is coming with different lenses, we also need to keep revisiting this spectrum from time to time. It is a good practice because it is showing that, and relationships are complex. These relationships are not just white and black. Oh, you took my pen, you have not respected my consent. Oh, you did that. Relationships doesn't look like that. There is relational consent, and there is relationship building, and there are times where your friends might not get it, or your colleagues might not get it. And for example, this enduring, tolerating, willing, wanting. So we can always visit it. Am I in this space because I want to be here? Because there are times where people are forced to be into post work events or informal spaces, but those also come under workspace if there are people, more than two people who are from the workspace. So also understanding, do I really want to be here? Or, and if I want to, so this makes me feel good, then I am willing, this is something I'm okay or neutral about. There are times when we are neutral about spaces. That doesn't entirely means, oh, I did not want it to go, or it is a very black and white space. So, and there are times when we get into situations where we are just putting up with it. So we are tolerating that. And enduring is also then the lowest bar of how we check that consent within our bodies. So enduring, tolerating, willing, wanting is a step which we can go back and forth with certain situations, because consent is a spectrum, and as it is always evolving based on context, nuance, and situations, we need to understand the power and complexity of dynamic relationships. As people who exploit power also, you know, come into that space of abuse with responsibilities like caregiving, like through monetary money positions in the social institution and relationship or state, and sometimes fear of losing that, fear of losing a loved one, close one, a friend, and disobeying people who exploit power can be a reason for anyone to give consent under pressure, manipulation, or confusion. And under pressure, manipulation, or confusion is not consent. And we can always analyze this through this tool, that in any relationship we are in, what is the based situation, consent is always there. uh, yes, you can move on to the next slide, Myra. So making and covering intersectionality was uh, very difficult for me, but I did it, and I tried to bring in what kind of values I believe in. Intersectionality is more than a buzzword, and it's a practice, choice, and unlearning. This word comes out from a long history of oppression of black, brown, and indigenous women, queer, crip, demanding access to equal rights for diverse identities. Breakdown isn't that simple for academics, because if we go into academia and we want to talk about intersectionality in the context of sexual violence, it will look a very heavy book. But if used among non-academic marginalized spaces, remembering our ancestral knowledge, rage against systematic violence, or learning colonial capitalist and casteist individualist practices, while we also exist in these complex situations, we open new possibilities. Steps we take is identify intersectional needs. And when I say intersectional needs, it means there can be 10 people in the room and 9 people don't want a ramp, but one does. So similarly, in cases of sexual violence also, if there is one different need, that doesn't mean we sideline that. We bring in, we make that accommodation, we center those kinds of intersectional needs. Simplifying complex theories, we don't need to learn 20,000 books to accept diverse realities. And also need to understand that while we work in communities, while we work within workspaces, simplifying things is important, and not acting through a morally righteous or a very academic view of things, but also making it accessible. So accept the work it requires to deconstruct. True intersectionality is centering intersectional needs. Without inclusion, it's just tokenism. And we see, and the and when we see in the context of sexual violence, systematic exclusion of marginalized sexual assault cases belonging from oppressed spaces. So these are the identities which might be systematically excluded when sexual violence is done on these identities, which is marginalized caste, disability status, your marginalized race, indigenous, tribal, native people, gender, sexuality, religion, immigrant, refugee status, migrant workers, geography, states. All of these things, all of these identity markers decide who will be excluded, who will be included, who will be heard. So looking at intersectionality in that way, we ask for systematic accountability to shift the responsibility from the victims and survivor to the people who are exploiting power, to dismantle the power authority and share power, to resolve the historical gender-based violence within our systems. We also acknowledge harm through historical, social, cultural, class, caste, religion, race, able-bodied capital, because some of us are also existing in spaces through these kind of capital. We do have such certain kind of cultural, class, caste, religion, and race and able-bodied capital. And also understanding that shame, if we abide to any kind of casteist, colonial, capitalist shame, then that will isolate us from each other and disengages us from community care. When we reclaim our shame and dismantle it, we reclaim our rest, power, control, and humanity towards each other. Collective, this is something I keep repeating, which is collective efforts and accountability brings collective liberation against systematic violence, and it is not one person's job, it is not an individual job. uh, and when I say community care means speak up even when your voice shakes, speak up when you know that no one will. Speak up. It is not one person's jobs to address it. You can always address the microaggressions before we get into the degrees of violence and the heinous act of violence. We also acknowledge their the people who are existing in who are existing in position of power. They are repeated offender, and their cases get highlighted after multiple people who have experienced violence addressed in isolated spaces. We also acknowledge our part in it, and foregrounding this, that shame doesn't belong to anyone. Let it go for collective liberation and co-creating a safer world for all. And there is, in the end, if we have time, we can discuss the last reflective question. You can scan it. Myra, can you share the last reflective question within the chat so people can keep answering that?
Yeah, if you can share that question in the chat, I think let's move on
Yeah,
to Shara because we don't have a lot of time right now.
exactly. Great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kinza.
Thank you,
But
everyone.
before I start, I would like to just ask Myra. There was a question in the text chat box that are we going to get these slides? So the participants want to know if they are going to get the presentation.
You will be receiving the recording in a week or
And
so.
and if you want the tool I shared, I can paste it on the chat. The consent spectrum of consent.
Okay, so now, yes, okay, so that has been sorted. So thank you everyone, and thank you Kinza for walking us through a power intersectionality, because these issues are really, really important when we are dealing with sexual abuse, harassment cases, especially in workspace. Okay, so my role have always been how can we bridge theory with practice. So we can always talk about policies, we can talk about big words, we can talk about law, but if we are not really implementing, or if we are not really doing the work that we are writing about, that's when the problem starts. So my part of the presentation would be about walking you guys through some real examples, real cases, and what's really happening around us. So yeah, let's get started. Can we go to the second slide, Myra? Okay. So in the beginning, lots of people, when you guys registered, first of all, thank you. So when we went through the responses that you guys had, that why you want to attend or be a part of this training, and then we try to summarize, or just we try to get the gist of your understanding and also your need. So four things really stood out to me. That was real dilemmas, systematic nuances, practical clarity, and the last one is what do I do. So basically it says that we have policies, we have a certain basic knowledge, we are working, but the thing is our paper, our policies are not really aligning with the reality that we are working with. So most of the people wanted practical clarity and also wanted to know that in real life scenarios, what kind of solutions we can really apply, right? So these were the needs, and on the basis of these needs, I have designed my part of the presentation. I am again going to just say something that when we talk about sexual violence, abuse, and harassment in workplace, it's a really, really broad topic. Alone, the power and consent that Kinza covered, you can have a whole day session. And with the investigation process, also, we can have a whole day session. But because it's a workshop, we have tried to tie things down really, really tight. But if you guys really want to know something in depth, please get in touch with us. We can have curated workshop or training sessions, or even can work with you guys to have a proper inclusive policy, which you guys can work with in your organization, correct? Thank you for that. Okay, second slide, Myra, please. Okay. So when we talk about principles about the PSEAH cases, PSEAH incidents in workplaces, many of us know about a few of these principles, right? The thing is that on international level or even in national level, different organizations and bodies, we have different kind of principles. So for example, the IASC, Interagency Standing Committee, they have certain principles, and basically those principles apply in humanitarian and development context. So if you're into humanitarian context, working with NGOs, INGOs, those are the principles that they follow. And UN is a huge entity. They have their own mechanisms and measures that they take in cases of this sexual violence harassment cases. And then recently, in 2024, we had the common approach principle to address these issues, which is known as CAPSEAH. So basically, it's not like they are separate entities or separate principles. All these policies and principles, they complement each other, right? The CAPSEAH, they basically take inspiration from the Interagency Standing Committee core principles, and they have added those into this common approach so that everybody can take bits and pieces from this policy, that policy, to make it a comprehensive comprehensive policy for their organizations. Okay, can we move to the next one? So now the question is, as we discussed, that policies exist. On the basis of policies, frameworks also exist, and trainings also happen. I'm sure our participants have attended or at least heard of such trainings. Then where it's falling short, then why we still have these cases, why the cases of sexual harassment, abuse are on the rise. So these capsules, I have kind of named them bitter reality pills. So a few things or misconceptions that we have, that when there are zero complaints, it means success. But it's a misconception. The thing is completely different. Zero complaint means that as an organization, they have to dig deeper to know that why we are not getting any complaints. Maybe there is fear. Maybe there is power imbalance. That's why we are not hearing about such cases, right? And then another thing, another misconception is neutral policy means fair system. Let me give you an example. Recently, I work with an organization to develop an inclusive policy, and they call it DNI, Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity policy. So it's an international brand. I'm not going to name any organization, but it's a example from my work so that lots of people can relate to it. So they said that we have a D&I policy in place. Can you just go through it? Let us know that if there is anything missing. So the part which says that it's diversity, inclusion, and equity, they have mentioned gender, they have mentioned disability rights and everything. One important thing that they didn't mention was sexual orientation and gender identity. So it's in Sri Lanka. So when I asked them that why you guys didn't add those two components, those two issues, so their response was, in Sri Lanka, it's a criminal offense. Same-sex sexual relationships still is a criminal offense, so we don't want to get in trouble. So that's why we have tried to keep it as neutral or as broad as possible, so that we are strategically covering the issues without getting in trouble, right? So in this situation, what you really do, the question is, does neutral policies always save us, always save organizations? In this kind of tricky situations, I always go, or I always ask the organizations that as an international brand, you are not only operating in Sri Lanka, you are operating in different parts of the world. What do you think, that are you ready to take that step? Because we need to understand that when we are talking about inclusion, when we are talking about rights, if the law is not in your favor as an organization, by making such policies, we can make a change or maybe start the change, right? So this is another misconception. When we think that there is a neutral policy, it means it's a fair system. The other thing is sexual harassment. Many times I have heard people say that it's deemed as less of an offense, because many times we think about abuse, we think about sexual exploitation, but maybe a joke, a snide comment, we don't take much notice of. But we must make notice, because such small acts, when they go unnoticed, that's when they go in the future, they form bigger offenses, right? So when you will start addressing small actions, that's when you can prevent the offense to be from taking place in the future. And the other problem is, I guess I replied to a text, somebody mentioned something to this effect, written policy versus implementation, that many times, many organizations, we have code of conduct, we have code of ethics, we have consent, we have zero tolerance, we have PSEAH policies in place. Still, there are issues that's happening in the country or in that context. So the contrast is that we can have written policies, but if we are not implementing them, considering the practical nuances that we experience, if we are not implementing, if we are not doing the thing that we are kind of promising people, that's when we fail, right? So fear of the system, fear of the committees, there is a trust gap, power imbalance, and the other thing is donor compliance versus field level reality. Many times, many organizations, when they're applying for funding, many times donors say that, do you have this policy in place? For example, PSEAH policy, do you have in place? It's like a checklist, right? So sometimes organizations, they quickly have a policy ready so that they can apply for the fund, but actually they are not really implementing. So this contrast, this clash also need to be addressed, that are we only treating such policies as a checklist, like a tick box, or are we really want to do something meaningful with the policies? So that's where we are falling short. Can we go to the next slide, Myra? Okay. This whole misconception thing also bring me to this slide, which say that what incentives might organizations have when handling safeguarding complaints? So the image that you guys can see with statistics, it says it's from a recent, from 2024 to 2025, a data set was collected, and it was shown that 84% of victims or survivors of PSEAH are women and girls. 1 in 5 is a girl, and 1 alleged perpetrator in 4 holds a managerial position, right? So we are seeing like two sides of the story. On one hand, we are seeing the beneficiaries that we are supposed to serve, their rights are being violated. And when we look on the flip side, that who are the violators, who are the alleged perpetrators, most of them are in managerial position. So when organizations are put in the middle to deal with such nuances, to deal with such intricate situation, their reputational risk, come into play. Then there is donor pressure, because once the donor knows that, okay, that yes, your organization is facing such problems, we are going to pull our funds, or maybe in the future they are not going to get that, so they have that pressure as well. And of course, the last but not the least is legal liability. Lots of organizations think that, okay, we already are dealing with lots of social problems, we are dealing with hiring people, retaining people, and on top of it we want to reduce the legal liabilities as much as possible. So all these things are at stake. So that is, this whole thing, why I discussed was also to show you guys that organizations also find them sometimes in between a rock and a hard position when they don't know that how to deal with such situations. So there is this back and forth as well. Okay. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. Please let me know if you guys have any questions. If I'm going too fast, okay? I'm sorry about that if that's happening. Okay. Now, as employees, why we need to understand these mechanisms, right? Because we know that under the policies itself, there has to have committees, there has to have experts, there has to have investigators who are really well equipped and have expertise to deal with such cases. Again, the same trend report, it showed that 56% of the SEAH incidents, always people have made to the people that they trust and also in person. So maybe there is a dedicated committee, there are dedicated experts, investigators, but maybe your colleague who consider you as a good friend will always come to you to share the details. Maybe sometimes as a friend, what we want just to be heard. We want somebody to share our problems with. We don't want anybody to give solutions immediately. We want somebody, sometimes when we talk to people, we kind of, get rid of the burden that we were carrying all this while. So what this means, it means that as an employee, whatever your role is, whether you are working in the HR, project, finance, you are the first response, right? You are the first person that the survivor, the victim who has experienced this issue came to you and confided in you, gave you the details. This also means that we cannot only rely on relevant committees. Yes, and that is the reason that employees, as employees, we really need to understand the SEAH mechanisms so that we know how to deal with these issues in a safer way. Okay. If we are clear, can we move to the next one? Yes, right. Now, this is the technical part. So for me, the thing is, usually people will walk you through the complaint process, that once somebody tell you about a complaint or file a complaint, what you do. You can see the common steps that we have. But for me, I'll do the other way around. My question has always been that when somebody comes to you and disclose about such incident, okay, we know what we have to do. If they want to agree to file a official or a formal complaint. But the important part for me is that what you do when somebody shares the incident with you but don't want to lodge a formal complaint. Do we just stop there? No, we don't. Because if we stop there, the whole incident will disappear. And we do not want that. So we know the process that once somebody agrees to file a formal complaint, we know the process that you file a complaint and it goes to the relevant agency or the committee, and then they do their due diligence, and then you get feedback, and we see some real actions. But when somebody, even they share with you but don't want to move forward with a formal complaint, first thing first, a few steps that as first responder that you can take is you document the facts. And always remember that when you hear about such incidents, we immediately form some judgment in our mind that, okay, this has happened, this is absolutely unacceptable. That's human nature. But we don't want to document our opinions. We just want to document the facts, the time, the person, when, where, how. Those are the things that you want to document. And then another response can be you support with honesty. Maybe the person is saying that, listen, I shared with you, but I don't want to file a complaint and I don't want you to take any step. You don't lie. You don't make any promise that you cannot keep. because you have now a responsibility because it has happened in the same workplace that you work in, right? So you can say that I'm really glad you told me, I want to support you, but I may need to share this to ensure safety. Okay? And another thing is, instead of raising this as an accusation, you can always raise it to the committee during meetings as a concern. So when we say accusation, it's more formal. But when you say concern, they will look into it maybe before filing it formally. So the reason why I'm saying this is because when you do it, when you raise it at least as a concern, you are making sure that the whole thing is not disappearing. Somehow you're trying to document it so that later on or at some point of time, people can get the support that they need. Okay? Okay, let's move to the next. Okay. So on the basis of the discussion so far we had, I would like to just pose this question to you guys. I'm going to read it out. And again, you have a Mentimeter a QR code. If you're comfortable, please go there and submit your responses. Or I'm looking at the chat box. You can also share your written responses here.
You can just use the chat box.
Okay, okay. So what would you do? A junior female staff member informally tells you that a senior manager, who is also the key donor contact, has been sending her personal messages late at night, offering mentorship outside work hours, giving her small gifts and special opportunities. She says she feels really uncomfortable, but also adds, I don't want to report this. It might affect my job and the project. So what we know so far, there is no formal complaint filed. So what would you do in this situation? So I have given you three options. Respect her wishes and do nothing formally. Encourage her to report and wait. Report or escalate the concern, maybe without her consent. I'm going to just give you a few minutes. I just want to see if there is any response, and then we are going to debrief this whole situation. Okay, I got one from Maria, which says A or B depending on the situation. Okay, do we have any more responses, or shall I just go ahead? Maybe another minute or so? Okay, Anupama says B. Thank you, Anupama and Maria. Encourage her to report and wait. Okay. Fariha Naseem also says B. Encourage her to report and wait. B, B. Okay, so B wins, I think, in this situation. Okay, okay. Pooja also said B. Okay, let's just try to go to the next slide and let's just see what are we dealing with. So now we know so far B, the option B has got most of the votes from you guys. Encourage her to report and wait. Then the question would be that even if you encourage her, what if she doesn't do it? So, okay, let's go to the next slide and see. Myra, can we see? Yes, okay. Maui said A. Okay. So first thing is, initially when we read it, it might sometimes seem like a gray area, right? That's why we got a bit of mixed response, A, B, though B got most of the votes. So in this situation, there are a few key points that we need to remember. Number one, grooming behavior that Kinza has covered a little bit. So grooming behavior, because if you notice the previous slide, if you remember, it talks about giving mentorship, right? So when somebody is offering mentorship outside their work, offering gifts or personal session, coaching sessions, those are all fall under grooming behavior. And if you have a PSEAH policy in any workplace, this is extremely prohibited under any circumstances. So we need to know that, number one. The other thing is heightened responsibility. What is this? So as we discussed that even when somebody says, no, I don't want to file a formal complaint, you have a duty to raise it as a concern, right? So that is heightened responsibility. That is also we need to know. So no actual or attempted mediation. Mediation is something that I'm going to discuss a bit more in like the next slide, hopefully. But here, let me just mention that you cannot mediate. So mediate is basically an informal kind of session where you bring both the parties, sit together and try to resolve. We see it in domestic cases, especially in divorce or in maintenance cases, that you bring both the parties to resolve it amicably. But in this situation, we cannot do it. Why we cannot do it? We will go into it. And do not confront. As I was talking about human nature, sometimes when my friend or my colleague, for example, if come and confide in me and share any such incident, my first reaction would be anger. That how come you faced it and how come I didn't know about it earlier? How come we are working with such a person, right? So you feel angry, you feel powerless, you feel frustrated. So sometimes that leads us to confront that alleged perpetrator. In PSEAH cases, you cannot and should not confront. I know that is our natural reaction, but we have to control it because we have to go through the proper channels, and that doesn't allow us to confront the perpetrator or alleged perpetrator. We always need to remember. So what could be certain responses? So as I said, that document the facts, do not document your opinions, and then always say that I'm really glad that you told me the same things that we discussed, right, in the previous slide, and raise it as a concern, not as an accusation. So if we compile the previous slide with this slide, what we understand is even when somebody don't wish to file a formal complaint, you don't force them, you don't mediate, you don't confront. What you can do is, yes, you just be a good listener, you document the facts, and then you raise it as a concern rather than an accusation. Okay, I hope we are clear so far. Can we go to the next slide, Myra? Yes, and Maria said that the survivor-centered approach requires us. Yes, absolutely. And soon we are going to discuss about survivor-centered approach. Thank you, Maria. Yes, the next slide. Okay.
Sure.
So,
Can you please give an example of like what's the different when you're posing a concern versus posing an accusation? What are the details you share in a concern
yes,
and not share? A
yes.
little bit.
Yes, of course. As I mentioned also earlier, that when we are talking about an accusation, it has to be formal. Whenever you say that I am accusing that person that he violated this right or something, always organizations will ask you to formally write it down and record it. But if you don't wish it, when you are raising it to as a concern, you can just do it in front of the committee verbally, and they will tell you that we will look into it more like informally, and then we will get back to you about what they found out through their investigation, through their team, right? So one is more formal. Once you register it as an accusation, like the formal complaint mechanism, the way it works, but when it's accusation, it gives you kind of, it's flexible because it's a concern. So they are going to walk you through that, what they found out and what's happening, things like that. Okay. Yeah. So now, crucial notes to remember. We have covered heightened responsibility, so I'm not going to repeat it. Grooming behavior we have talked about. The other thing is fraternization. What is it? We need to understand that as well, because in other than grooming behavior, in many organizations, sometimes you will notice, maybe not always, that some colleagues are closer than the rest. There is PDA. PDA is public display of affection, or there is some kind of favoritism, right? So which you can see, which you can feel that the kind of favor or the kind of body language one person is having with the other one, he or she is not having it with you. So that is fraternization. Fraternization, I'm sorry. It's a bit complicated word. So yeah, those are the two things that we need to remember in PSEAH policy. And in your PSEAH policy, always make sure that you provide the definition and also add these two sort of behavior, and always make zero tolerance for this. Attempt or actual mediate. So as I said that I'm going to talk about it a bit more. The thing is, according to international standards and mechanisms, no international mechanisms or standards allow you to mediate in cases of PSEAH. sexual violation, exploitation, or harassment cases, you cannot mediate. Mediation can only happen in domestic cases, marital cases, family issues, okay, not in SEAH cases. And disclosure versus concern, that also we have kind of talked about. Disclosure, concern is more like when somebody is telling you about something, and then you, as we talk about it, that you raise it as a concern. Somebody is disclosing like a really sensitive part of their life, and you are raising it as a concern. So this lead me to ask you also that when you hear a rumor, should we also report a rumor? So for this, this question I actually got recently. One of the organizations, he was working with the HR department. He asked me that many times we gossip in different offices, it happens. So gossiping or rumor about such kind of behavior, do people need to report about these things as well? So my suggestion would be that if you see something, always say something. If you think that there's something happening, you don't talk between or among your colleagues. You always raise it to the HR, or if there is a dedicated committee, and then you do not do any investigation. You let them do their job. If even if it's a rumor, they will get back to you and they will tell you that yes, you are right, it is not a rumor, it's a fact, and we are going to look into it. Or yes, you are it's not a rumor, or maybe it's a rumor, some people just was trying to, you know, just twist some facts. That's why we have it. So always remember, if you see anything, feel anything, say something. That is the key. So before I talk about SEAH and child rights, age of consent, or best interest determination, I also want to walk you through regarding the stats that we have, which is children under 18, in vast majority girls, make up to 2 in 5 victims. They accounted for 40% of all cases against aid recipients. Over a third received no support. These are true stats, are not made up. Only 38% of child survivors of sexual abuse access medical care. Even fewer receive legal aid. So that is why when we are talking about SEAH policies, it is extremely important that we also connect it with child rights, right? And before going into details about age of consent, I want to share some more information and a case study. Then we will come back to these points. Myra, can you go to the next slide? So,
Under just the time reminder, we have 5 minutes.
okay, so we are just going to go really fast. Anyway, so the harsh reality is in 2016, this Justice Chitambe at the Malindi High Court overturned a 20-year prison sentence for 24-year-old man convicted of defiling a minor. And the quote that the judge gave was, where the child behaves like an adult and willingly sneaks into men's houses for purposes of having sex, the court ought to treat such a child as a grown-up who knows what she is doing. And these are the words of a judge. So if in legal context, that is the kind of judgment that we are getting, you can easily understand that what is happening in humanitarian context. That is why it is utterly important to make sure that child rights are also included in your policies. And because we are running short of time, I'm going really brief, that when we are talking about child rights, even if in the local context, for example, if the age of consent is 14 or 16, always remember that internationally or globally, it has to be always 18. That's number one. Number two, when you're talking about consent, if there's a power imbalance, consent does not come into play. There is always, it is abuse. Even the child gives consent. We need to always remember that, okay? And as I was talking about best interest determination, it's for child rights in SEAH policies, that if the victim or the survivor is a child who's under the age of 18, you always deal with the case making or keeping that child's interest in mind, or making that your priority. Can we go to the next slide, Myra? Okay, so this is the case study. I'm not going to go into this because this is the same about child rights. I'm just going to walk you through some real life questions that I have faced during my work. Yeah, Myra, let's just keep it. Okay, so these are the questions that in last 8 years when I have worked with different organizations I got, and I'm going to just pose the questions and answer you as well. So one of the questions that I received once, I remember that I did not know about any such policy. the perpetrator was saying, the HR informed that when the perpetrator said that they did not know about the policy, is that like an excuse? It is never an excuse. Not knowing the policy will never be an excuse for you. The other one is I took notes and now cannot find the hard copies. So sometimes as a first responder, if you are taking notes, say with pen and paper, do not do that. Always record the facts, always record the prime information and have soft copies and have it in a confidential manner, because pen and paper, you can lose them anytime. Okay. Then, since we focus on survivor-centered approach, shall we also consider the power, position, and influence of the alleged perpetrator? Absolutely, we have to, because when we are talking about victim or survivor, often we don't think about the power, position, or the influence that the perpetrator or the alleged perpetrator can have. So it is very important to make sure the safety and confidentiality of the victim or survivor, okay? That you think about it, that where this alleged perpetrator is coming from. The other one is how to tackle fear of religion or spirituality, in victims or survivors. In the global south, we will see that many times when you are working in rural areas, there is moral policing, there is shaming, and religion and your customs come into play. So if you see that that kind of mentality is influencing the decision that the survivor or victim is trying to take, always refer them to counseling units. And you have to have counseling units, which I'm sure Myra will cover during survivor-centered approach. Another thing is, do we have to share all forms of PSEAH incidents with donors? Okay, this is tricky. So the suggestion that I gave, that you categorize the types of violence that you have. For example, if it's the first time offense, or if it's maybe a verbal comment, those you might skip and you don't need to share with your donor. But if it's repetitive kind of a pattern that is happening in your organization and somebody from the managerial position, you always have to inform your donor about it. You are obliged to do that. The other thing is, we have a policy that covers everything. We don't require anything else. No, generic policy don't work. You have to be very, very specific that what you want and how you want it and implementation of it, okay? Another realistic problem that I always hear, that we are a small organization and we do not get enough budget to ensure that all PSEAH policies and actions are in place, which is true. Many small organizations don't have budget. One example I'll give very shortly that I suggested and it worked. If such incidents are occurring in the context that you're working, start documenting them. Start documenting them, and next time when you're presenting your donor report or you are asking for a funding, always attach the statistics or the frequency of these incidents and make sure that you tell them that this is important, we need to do it, and we need to have fun for it. And that is one of the strategies that you can apply. Document, share, show them the importance of having such policy or budget lines to have such policies. The last one, once the investigation is done, our job is done too. It's not. There's follow-up that you have to do, and I'm sure Myra will walk you through that process. Last slide, Myra. Okay. So on the basis of the questions many times that I got, these are the basic kind of real life actions I have noted down for you guys, but these are not exhaustive lists, right? You can just read it from here. It's just, for example, I'm just going to read it, that offer multiple reporting options. So when you're reporting, you also need to have, other than formal channels, you have anonymous or third-party option. Then you have to train all your staff. You have to define roles, that who's going to be in the committee, who's going to do the investigation, and who's going to decide. Provide basic timelines of investigation or filing a complaint, even if it's a rough one, okay? Most important is engage communities, that the communities that you're working with, there are lots of nuances that as employees you won't understand. So talk to them and take their feedback into account while you're formulating the policies. Also, again, be very specific with your language that you use in PSEAH. Do not go with generic clauses. Train, sensitize, and follow up on a regular basis. Do not make it as a checklist practice. Also develop pictorial or non-verbal version, because for your field employees, sometimes such technical policies they don't understand. So to make it understandable and to make it work, always have really easy to understand pictorial or non-verbal version of your policy. Again, as I mentioned, keep record of such incidents to share with your donors if you need funding opportunities. I think that was all from my end. And I'm really sorry if I have taken more than I guess more than time that I was allocated. And if you guys have any question, you guys have our email address and the chat box also open. Please get in touch with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shreya. If you can share the feedback form as well as our email address, our website in the chat, that would be great. So I'm so sorry and I'm so thankful to everyone for still being here. It is remarkable that you are. If you need to take deep breaths, I think that's now is the time to do so. I will give you a minute to just deep breaths before I also, start. In this deep breath time, if you want to pose any questions to either Shara or to Kenza, please do so in the chat and they will respond to you. We're just going to take 30-second more break before we start. Okay. Welcome back from this very, very, very short break. My name is Myra, and we will be covering survivor-centered response. I saw that in the chat there were some people who already knew about it. That's amazing and awesome. So there's not a lot for me to, lay the fundamentals down. But let's look at survivor-centered response a little bit from a systems lens. We ask ourselves, why do we center survivors? And let's also ask ourselves, why did we not center survivors? Like, if it's a response that's specifically for handling a particular case in which there is a survivor, so why wouldn't the response typically be survivor centered? It's because a lot of the times, usually responses are shaped by the criminal justice system. The injury is not to the person, but to the citizen of a state. And because of that, we see that the response that takes up is the state's response. The criminal justice system takes over, or the response is not to a person themselves, but rather to the institution. You see, the institution gets in, they are doing mitigation, they're protecting their reputation, or they're just doing it out of benevolence, whatever they're doing. So it's not a common instinct to be centering survivors. That's something very recent and very new that we have been doing. And before we did that, survivors were required to prove their credibility. And unfortunately, I would still say that they still have to. And we'll get into that. Investigations prioritize evidence over well being. Yes, because the answer was if they get justice, that's the reward. Why do we have to care about the process of how do you get justice? You see in old movies, you see the policemen just beating up someone to get a confession out of them and then feel heroic because they say we found the person, the perpetrator, so now it's all right, we did the violence. That's not how survivor-centered response works. Because of all of these things, there was reporting, there was traumatization, and we already know that PSEAH causes a lot of harms. There's psychological harm. Of course, you are traumatized by the incident. You also face PTSD. You face challenges going back to work. You have health issues. A lot of survivors develop a lot of chronic health illnesses. You face social challenges, you face stigma, you're not able to sit in the room with old friends. And finally, you face economic harm because obviously you might lose a job, you might not be able to go to work when you're too sick or too afraid or too ashamed to be in those rooms. So there are a lot of repercussions for survivors when something bad happens. So how do we respond? So a little background to survivor-centered approach is that it basically, there were anti-violence movements of by feminists led in the 1970s and 80s. It was the era of, the Vietnam War, the Cold War was going on. There was this entire movement to say no to war. And you see the photographs even now of like uh, people putting flowers in the barrels of guns. And that's where essentially this discussion started out from anti-violence, because anti-violence translates to everything else, because our essential in safeguarding is to prevent the harm that happens through violence. So we are trying to prevent violence itself from happening and not just mitigate that one harm. Slowly we see the emergence of CEDAW, we see the emergence of different we see different conferences happening on the global level. We see a renewed focus. We see rape as getting acknowledged as a weapon, that it can be used as a weapon of war. We see rape as a human rights crisis. Rape becomes acknowledged as a human rights violation and not just a gender-based violation. So we see a renewed focus on violence against gendered persons, and that is how this gets linked. What is violence, and what in those discussions, then slowly when the UN and humanitarian safeguarding frameworks come into being, and they're like, yes, we have to prioritize things, because the conversation about power has started, because feminists and all their advocacy has started the conversation of who's in charge, who is looking at the harassment cases, who has power, who is manipulating others, who is causing harm. These questions start raising, how do we make our workplace safer, because this is also the time when we're talking about bringing more women to the workplace, right? So these are also the eras where there's, the Cold War has ended after the 1980s. There's this renewed enthusiasm for capitalism and this drive to get women back into the workforce and, prove the capitalist model, and prove modernity. So there's a lot of things happening in the world. And in that time, there is this question. So you get women into the workplace, but how do you make them safe? And that is where we see this emergence of these kind of approaches. Now, what is the response? So we all know it. There's nothing miraculously different about it. Something bad happens, you remember that you can do something about it. You've read a policy, then you disclose it. Now, this is where the importance is. First of all, knowledge of rights. So when you're in development sector, you see a lot of programming being done on awareness raising. This is what they're trying to build up to. That if people do not know they have rights, they start at the step zero. They don't really move forward. They're just like, all right, we don't have rights. We are victimized, and that's where we'll be. But it's when they know that they have rights and they know that they have a policy they can fall back on, they can access it. Moving on is disclosure. Now, disclosure is very important, and this is something Sarah just covered in detail. So I'm going to cover a point about it, that there are certain ways disclosure can happen. You can disclose or report through official channels, through third parties, through web-based portals, through direct persons, to HR persons, to safeguarding leads. So that organizations may have like, there are some organizations that have had up to 20 different ways to disclose, right? So there's organizations usually have many ways to disclose. But what happens is, it matters who you're disclosing to. So for example, if you are an employee and you go and disclose it to another friend of yours, uh, they do not have mandatory disclosure requirements, right? So if it's a co-worker on the same level as you, they're not your manager, they're not an authority figure, they are not really required by the organization or the safeguarding policy in most of cases to actually raise it as a concern or even raise it as a disclosure. It is a good practice to raise it as a concern, as Shara has said, but it's not a mandatory requirement on them. However, if you're a manager and some underlying someone who they're supervising comes to them and reports anything, it then becomes mandatory for them to report it forward. And this is something where survivor-centered response would sort of kick in and be like, but has the person who has been hurt, have they agreed for this disclosure? And so there's a clash with being survivor centered versus the organization's policies. You can also see these things when you visit a doctor's office. For example, if a doctor sees a bruise, uh, in many countries they have and they see adequate evidence of violence, they have to report it to the police. Even if the person themselves says they don't want to, because they have observed it and they have deemed this as violence, there are countries with mandatory reporting requirements. Likewise, if a person is a threat to themselves or to other people, they are there are mandatory requirements. So in these mandatory cases, there's a difference where you can't really put the survivor's will first. In survivor-centered response, however, what we do is we understand that in certain settings, certain providers should have certain mandatory requirements. For example, hospitals can be a place where a survivor can go. A lot of the times, people who are victimized do not have a space to report, do not know who to report to, but they might know to go to a doctor and they might trust that doctor that they might be able to help us. So their mandatory reporting requirements also serve their purpose. But in workplaces, it's very important to be very clear in your safeguarding policy who is this mandatory reporter, because you don't want someone to raise something to you and then the other person to be like, now it threatens my job to not raise it as a formal thing, right? So not as a concern, but a formal thing. And then the autonomy of the survivor is completely taken away because they are pushed into a system where they have to, be part of investigations, provide evidence of their claims, and they're like really made to go through the whole stuff. So it's important to know who can you report to, who will take it to what level, right? That is where case management comes. So once the report happens, once you see that um, either a formal report has been lodged, then organizations will start doing case management. They will write it down, they will assemble a committee. And now the important question that Kinza raised at the very start, who is part of the committee? And it is very true still that many times the committees are made up of people in power who are either friends with the with a perpetrator, because they are also the perpetrator is also a person in power. So you see that managers stick together and associates stick together. So that kind of power difference makes sure that even if a woman is sitting in that seat, but she's also a manager and she is like a mentee of that person, so she'll take the side of that person. So it's important to really be visibly to have a diversity in job roles and job positions and power and gender identity on who's sitting in that committee. I think that's very important. Once the case is managed and the committee is formed, the first decision is taken is that we provide support to the survivor. And this doesn't happen after the case is resolved. This doesn't even happen if you find that the survivor is telling the truth. Like, it's not a search for the truth. Rather, if somebody has brought up a claim, you provide them with mental health support. You provide them with their rights. You provide them with the safeguarding policy. You provide them with their options. You give them everything in a language they can easily understand. You do not throw a policy at them that's written in a legal language that they cannot understand and say that you have referred them to services. Similarly, you cannot give them a hotline number and expect that you have done your job as a referral. Because a lot of the times, because hotlines and different support services are overwhelmed, they might not take in the survivor, and then you say you have done your role, but you haven't. Your job is to ensure the survivor has support services, not just to refer them to support services. So making those connections as an organization to mental health providers, to different support services, so that the person that you're referring to can actually get help is very, very important. Then there is an investigation process, and now this is extremely important because as a particular as a survivor, they're going to judge you. It's going to happen. That's how the world is set up. So the proof of evidence, even though they will conduct their own investigations, they will do interviews, they will look around, there will be still expectation that you have some evidence to your claim that you are presenting. And this is where things like verbal comments can become really hard to prove, because now a person, you claim that this person verbally harassed you, but like there's obviously you were not recording it at that time. So how are you going to prove it? So in cases like that, a lot of the times what happens is the organizations look at patterns of violence, and this is what Shara said makes it so important. If someone else had prior raised a concern about that person, that becomes a trail of evidence of the pattern. So basically, even if that complaint was never raised, it was just written down in their notes. Now that three people have raised concerns, they have to make it a formal thing. But it is, unless someone reports, it cannot be the case cannot go forward. So concern raising can help you generate evidence. So if you are scared that I don't want to report, it's still important to make sure that you raise a concern, so that if it happens to somebody else, they have that evidence ready, so they can rely on that precedence, and it can help them build a evidence that there's a pattern of abuse by this person. So it's always raise a concern with the required safeguarding persons, with the required human resource person, even with your managers. Go with the person that you trust, you think will listen to you, and have it written down, have it documented. Then we say organizational decision making, there's a decision that comes, and then finally, redress and compensation. A lot of the times we forget the solution is that the survivor has to get some sort of a redress, and we'll come to it. So, NCR response. We have talked about a lot of things. I'm just going to talk about something very specific to all of the things that we have talked about. What are the core principles? I mean, it's CR, so we have understood so far what to do, but some basics throughout the process that will remain are that the survivor cannot be re-traumatized. For example, if you are doing mandatory mediations because your company requires it, you need to provide some sort of a security to the survivor. Perhaps they're not comfortable facing that person in real life. You might have to do it on a video camera. You might have to provide the survivor a safe person who can accompany them to that mediation. You need to make sure that the process of getting them justice does not harm them more than the harm itself. So that needs to be accounted for every step of the way. Second, autonomy. You cannot tell them what they want. For example, if a survivor has posed it very clearly that I would like this person to not be my manager anymore, and you tell them, hey, we have told them, we have chided them, we have docked their pay. So can you please suck it up and, accept those penalties instead of the one you have asked for? That is not justice, because that does not serve the purpose that the survivor is raising. So it's very important to really pay attention to how the survivor wants the system to and the process to go, instead of how the system wants the survivor to be pushed into a process. So really question. Then we see confidentiality. It's essential that nothing goes from one person to the next person that's confidential. It's like the Holy Bible and every holy book, the holy command, do not share information outside of who you're allowed to share information with, because that can radically change the outcome. If the entire company knows this person has made a complaint against this person, they might start to outcast that person, and they might start to criticize them. So even if they get the required result and there is justice, because of those rumors, they might not be able to stay at the company, even though the company has not retaliated. It's just the culture is retaliatory, right? So we have to be very careful. And then there's support. I've already talked about this. We have to provide them psychological support, social support, and legal support, and justice. Justice needs to be according to the wishes of the particular survivor. Then we look at what kind of wishes can the survivor possibly have. So because we already know that the survivor's autonomy comes first, survivor-centered response, the person might say that, hey, because I've suffered a lot through this process, I would like a paid leave of 1 month so that I can recover from this. and during this time you can organize your organization in a way that justice is served. So that kind of flexible requirements and flexible demands can really make it easier for the survivor to come back and feel confident that this is a company that supports me. Their reporting lines may change, their manager change. It's also reassignment is a tricky thing because sometimes the survivor is reassigned instead of the perpetrator, and because for their safety, and that might be good for the survivor because they're in a good space, in a good environment, and they don't have to face the same things again, and there are no rumors because this is a new team. But it can also make them feel like they got punished for reporting because they were relocated. So it's always important to ask the survivor what they want. Do they want to move, or do they want that person to move? Do they want that person to move to another team, or do they want to move to another team? And prioritize that instead of making that decision on their behalf. And then flexible working arrangements, just like working with them to figure out what's going to suit them better. And then balancing rights and responsibilities. We already know that there are some mandatory reporters. So it's also very important to understand. Companies also have mandatory reporting requirements. So if there are particular cases, like for example, in certain countries, it's a requirement that if you have harassment cases that are reported to the company has to forward those cases to the ombudsperson, who is the countries or the provinces or the state's ombudsperson, who might just keep a record of those things. Or, for example, if there's a criminal act that has happened, for example, a sexual harassment has happened or a sexual abuse case has happened, something of a deeper, graver concern, then there's also a responsibility to report it to the police. Every safeguarding policy has to be very, very clear. What are the reporting requirements of the company, so that when the survivor actually takes a step, they are not bamboozled. Maybe they don't want to go to the police, but because they went to the company, they now have to go to the police. So it's very, very important that you write in your safeguarding policy what the company's requirements are. Now, how institutions safeguarding system responds. We have already talked about these things. Who do you actually report to? There might be safeguarding focal persons. There might be HR or ethics officers. There might be anonymous reporting channels. It's always important to have like streamlined reporting channels. If you have too many, you might not have faith in any of them. So, and there might be poor coordination between those. There are different types of investigations. I've already talked that criminal investigations might require the company to involve the police. So it's really important to really specify what the company considers a criminal investigation versus an administrative investigation. And beyond the investigation, again, something we have mentioned, that who conducts the investigation matters, what standard of proof you're bringing. For example, you need to document everything. You need to have testimonies from other workers. You need to have witnesses. You need to have proof of characters. So there's a lot of things that you might have to prepare. And all of these things we will discuss in detail in our longer training. This is a little bit of like an overview, so I'm not going into details. Because we have limited time, I'm choosing to avoid the Menti part. I really apologize for that. And we have already discussed the various principles, but just to let you know, a PSEAH policy needs to have all of these different requirements. How do you report? Who do you report? What is the process? How transparent is the process? Do no harm, obviously. There's no tolerance for inaction. There cannot be a retaliation, all of those things. So we have already covered these things in different ways. Now, this is something I really wanted to cover, which is a feminist safeguarding approach. And this is what Shara has talked about as well. A feminist safeguarding approach requires that you don't just help the individual, you change the system. So if a complaint has been brought, if the only thing that you do is that you give a minimal response, and you're just trying to protect the organization, you're just a risk manager. You're not really providing the survivor any support. You're not even doing anything for the system change. You're just trying to be like, let's protect the organization's reputation. Or there are those companies that will have amazing safeguarding policies and will do absolutely nothing when something real happens. Those are the performatives. They perform, they don't actually perform when it comes to the need to perform. Their performance is more of a drama. There are those who actually do support survivors, which are those who you might think are survivor centric. But they may support survivors but do not challenge institutional power structure. They might see patterns over patterns that managers are different kinds of managers are harming their supervisees, right? But despite that, they do not question why their system is allowing this to happen multiple times to multiple people. So those are the band-aid response. And those are the ones we sometimes confuse and think that they are survivor centric, but they're actually not being survivor centric. They are just trying to put a band aid on one case and then put it again on another case. And then the ones from a feminist perspective are the leaders, the one who look across the spectrum, look at multiple cases, and then make a decision of how do we provide meaningful support to the survivor, but also change our system so that it doesn't happen to anyone else. Transforming the system is a feminist imperative. Providing the victim, the survivor, adequate support is a feminist imperative. And both of them have to go side by side. This is a useful resource. You can just take a screenshot of this. I think this is a good document that you can look into after the session is over. This is our SEAH training, and this is me stopping and taking a breath. So we have a few minutes. I don't want to rush. If anybody has any questions, please do share them. I know time is running out, but we wanted to make sure we cover everything. We will share the recording with all of you. We will share the links to all of our LinkedIn, our email. Uh, Kenza has shared our feedback form because we have provided this free labor. Uh, it's sort of like a feminist imperative of reciprocity that you provide us at least feedback so that we can learn and improve and use your feedback in our different material. So if you can please fill the feedback form, that is really appreciative. I will share this again in an email. If there are any questions, please do share. We are always available to do these workshops more in detail, more specific workshops for your organizations. We do very economical, decolonial work. We try to work with you based on your needs. So if anybody wants to reach out in any way, and even if you don't know what you need help with, we have our sense making workshops where we essentially sit with you and make sense of what you need. So please do reach out. And that's all I have to say. Pinza, Shara, if anything you have to add.
Okay, so nothing really to add, but I'm just going to say that this whole workshop, we have tried to really narrow it down for you guys. So you might feel overwhelmed because we were also feeling overwhelmed because there's so many important things that we wanted to share, we wanted you to know about. I'm sure you also wanted to know more about. But the reality is within such limited time, it's very difficult to unpack this whole broad SEAH policy mechanism and the nuances. So even if you're feeling overwhelmed, just whenever you receive the recording, go through the recording, and if there's anything that resonated with you or you wanted to know more, get in touch with us and we will unpack together. We will learn, share, and relearn together. Hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you so much, everyone, for staying this long. And you have a very nice take. And that you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just saying I've added this in on the chat as well that it was very like the participants really engaged with it. It was very meaningful engagement, and I loved curiosities and reflections, and we are willing to also while we also think of these frameworks, we also decolonize self while we do this. I'm really glad that everyone joined. Thank you so much. That is all.
Thank you so much, everybody. I will be going now. Bye bye.